Okay, we're just waiting for the final people to join our webinar. Thank you so much. This is an emergency webinar that we've organised. I'm Sophie Bolt. I'm the General Secretary of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. So this webinar is No War on Iran, End the Nuclear Hypocrisy. We're in a situation where Trump and Netanyahu's unprovoked illegal bombings of Iran have killed over 1,000 people in that country, including hundreds of children, and we now have the risk of unleashing a catastrophic war across the region. Their actions have provoked Iranian retaliation against US bases and energy supplies, resulting in even more loss of life and casualties. Oil prices continue to rise, worsening the economic instability globally. And it's clear that this is, nothing to do with the supposed nuclear threats from Iran. This country has acted in good faith over these negotiations, and in fact, both the US and Israel have repeatedly sabotaged diplomatic efforts. And it's the height of nuclear hypocrisy that Iran's genuine engagement in talks results in crippling sanctions and illegal bombings, whilst nuclear armed Israel is politically backed and armed to the hilt in its genocide of the Palestinian people. So, having initially argued that he wouldn't commit the UK military to unlawful action, Starmer has now buckled to Trump's pressure and given permission for the use of British bases like RAF Fairford and Diego Garcia to bomb Iran's missile sites. And British jets, for instance, are engaging in military action to so-called protect Israeli airspace. So Britain is, being rapidly sucked into yet another US-led illegal war that the public don't want. So tonight, we're joined by a really fantastic lineup of speakers to discuss the global dynamics surrounding this latest outrage by Trump and Netanyahu, the situation within Iran and the wider region, and Britain's kind of political and military involvement. And of course, what we can do to stop the bombing of Iran and what is needed to bring about peace and stability, and an end to this deadly war drive and the sort of the worsening nuclear threats in the Middle East and globally. So a lot for us to sort of to be discussing at this critical time. So our first speaker is Anne Wright. She's a retired US colonel. She's part of the Global Women United Against NATO, and it's an absolute delight and privilege to have her with us here today. Over to you, Anne.
Well, thank you very much, Sophie. And I'll just show them what I feel about in this T-shirt, which actually I think I got 6 years ago, 5 years ago in London under Trump 1. But first, my apologies for the action of my government in the current war on Iran, the assassination of 40 members of the leadership of Iran, including the Ayatollah Khamenei and his family. And also on January 3rd, 2026, the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro and the former National Assembly president and former Attorney General of Venezuela, Celia Flores, who happens to be the spouse of Nicolas Maduro. The actions of the government of the United States continue to be illegal, unlawful, and dangerous to the world. We, the people of conscience in the U.S., are trying our best to figure out how to stop the murderous Trump regime, but so far we're unsuccessful. But you can see from all the protests all over the United States and, of course, all over the world, the people of the world of conscience are horrified about what's going on here. I'm going to share some slides that I have because I think it's important to have some visual things and a reminder of what we've been doing over the years. And I'll just go back 7 years ago where I was on a Code Pink trip to Iran. And here we are, this group in front of the Peace Museum in Tehran. And at that time, us with you all saying peace with Iran, This has been a mantra that we've had forever. We had a long meeting with the foreign minister of Iran while we were there. We had meetings with all sorts of civic groups and with people from all over Iran. We went all through the country, and it is so heartbreaking to know that the duplicity, the hypocrisy of the United States and following the lead of Israel to brutally attack Iran and assassinate the leadership of the country is the war crimes of the highest degree. And if there is a hell, there are a lot of people who already had reservations in it, but they're going into the depths of it for all of the things that they've done. The whole issue of the nuclear talks that were going on, and now we know that the negotiator from Oman, the foreign minister there, had flown to Washington, D.C. to make sure that President Trump heard that indeed there had been major progress done in the negotiations. And in fact, the negotiations were much further along for what the U.S. wanted than what had happened during the Obama administration. But despite all of that, the plans were already made that the U.S. would follow Israel. And now we have the Secretary of State that finally admitted that, oh, well, we heard Israel was going to attack. We knew that there would be a blowback from that, so we'd better jump in to the attack ourselves, rather than we're trying to stop Israel from doing this. Nothing like that. So again, our apologies from the people of the United States that we are unable to stop this murderous regime of the Trump administration. And it's not only in Iran, where we're talking about this morning, that's our focus, but I've just come back from trips in January and February to two other places where U.S. foreign policy is dangerous, and Venezuela and Cuba. And I'll just show a couple of slides of us being in Venezuela. This Medea Benjamin of Code Pink Women for Peace organized this trip, and seeing with here's Nicolas Maduro and his wife Celia, and this is in the foreign ministry where we had discussions with the foreign minister about what the U.S. had done and what at this stage we can do to try to ameliorate what has happened, which includes, of course, having big protests at the Brooklyn detention center where both Nicolas Maduro and his wife Celia are. This is a view from one of the large communes up a hill. This is one of the houses of the government, but it was not the house where Maduro was. It was behind this hill. But the U.S. Brutal attacks, and you think, 4 hours worth of attacks in Venezuela now versus 5 days of massive attacks in Iran, where the U.S. admits to over 1,200 individual strikes on cities in Iran, and the destruction of endless numbers of weapons. But here in Venezuela, one of the things that we saw were the destruction of all the communications towers. And this was up on a large hill where one of the UNESCO sites for a library of Latin American heritage is located. And it's also up where a nuclear reactor was. It's a nuclear reactor for making medical isotopes. And that's the same thing we have in Iran. In the center of the city of Tehran is a nuclear reactor that is used for peaceful purposes, for isotopes and things like that. And I wouldn't be surprised that the United States targets that, because it's well known. When we were there in 2019, we actually visited that site. But as life goes on in Venezuela, it was remarkable how the transition in power and the calmness. There was no chaos after the U.S. attack and the kidnapping of the head of state. The succession of power, which is being determined now in Iran, but the succession of power in Venezuela happened very quickly. So no government ministers resigned. There was no major protests of the opposition. The opposition is as splintered as can be. We went out to a fishing commune, and this picture shows some of the a band that an Afro-Caribbean band that was there at this fishing commune, and we had a little flotilla, for peace, not war, reminding everyone that the fishing boats that are coming in the Caribbean and the Pacific around northern South America have been targeted, and over 140 people have been killed by the U.S. in illegal, unlawful assassinations of supposedly narco traffickers. But life continues, and this was in another commune where we were, where these young people danced and let us know things were that they're not giving up on the Bolivarian Revolution. And speaking of the Bolivarian Revolution, which is also a great supporter of the people of Palestine, and this is one of the big murals for the people of Palestine. And as a last one for Venezuela, we went to the memorial for Hugo Chavez. And most of these memorials are, memorable. This one was memorable not only for his work on equity and social justice for the people of Venezuela, but also for the people of Palestine. Because if you look in that picture, there are two flags that are there. Of course, the Venezuelan flag, but on the right is the Palestine flag. I mean, that brought us all to tears when we saw that. And then quickly, I'll just go on to Cuba. Earlier in January, I was on another trip, and here's the iconic old cars of Cuba, and it reminds you that the destruction that happens when the U.S. does their military operations, that we're seeing so much that we see in Gaza, and now we're seeing in Venezuela. But these are some of the things that will be destroyed for sure when uh, if the U.S. decides to take military action in Cuba, which we are pushing back on. We'll have a large delegation that'll be going to Cuba March 20th to 23rd. If you go to Code Pink Women for Peace and can join us, we would love it. We're calling it a flotilla because we hope to have a couple of boats coming from Caribbean countries, but we will have charter flights that'll be going out of Miami, and you can still fly commercially into Cuba. So we would like for everyone to join us. This is a picture of the president of Cuba with whom we had an hour conversation where he was mentioning, the concern, and we were there after the January 6th the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro. And Diaz-Canel said, yes, of course we're worried. I mean, we know the U.S. is capable of doing whatever it wants. I mean, over 600 assassination attempts were made on the life of Fidel Castro. So the current president knows that he's in the target eyes, but he says we have to continue. I mean, we have a revolution. We have, we have our sovereignty. We're a peaceful country, and it's up to you guys to get your government under control, which of course we will be trying. And just to see some of, Cuba that will be destroyed. This is the Hotel Nacional that many of you all have probably seen on trips. The fortress that has guarded the entrance to Havana Harbor, for centuries. And no doubt that would be a target of the United States. When we look at the small areas that are around Havana, when we see the beautiful people who are trying to maintain their lives in dancing and music, when we see the kids that were out on the streets on the birthday of the anniversary of Jose Marti, when we see the International Jazz Festival that was held in Havana while we were there, when we see all of the people, the intellectuals, the poets, the authors that are still in Cuba that are remarkable in all of their work, that is a heritage to all of the world for what they do. When we see the sculpturing, the artistry, even in buildings, as you can see, this is a building that has not been maintained or renovated because they don't have the materials to do it because of the U.S. sanctions that we have on Cuba. And this is our small little group. And then I'll just mention that not only is the U.S. Internationally wreaking violence on the world, but domestically we are also. And here is a trip I was in January to Minneapolis, which is the scene of a lot of the domestic violence in the United States, and at the plaza for George Floyd, who was murdered by the United States 6 years ago. Every day at 8:30 in the morning, there are activists that gather there to say, get ICE out of here, get ICE out. And this picture of these small kids who represent the victims of the United States horrible violence. But it has created a citizens mass movement in Minneapolis that's quite remarkable, and which has spread throughout the United States. This is a remarkable, horrible thing coming after this. This is a detention facility, Whipple in Minneapolis, where thousands of immigrants have been held. And yet every single day there are protests. And just 2 days ago, 15 more people were brutally assaulted and knocked down. And this backward sign is probably the greeting for everybody in Minneapolis. You don't say, oh, how are you doing? What you say is, pardon my French, fuck ICE. And that is on everything. It's now a part of the vernacular of the United States in a very different way from where we have used it before. So it's with a heavy heart that I again say our apologies to the people of the world for what our government's doing, and the whole issue of the duplicity and hypocrisy of using a nuclear program that Iran had as a method or a rationale, a very bad rationale for bombing the country and assassinating the leadership is horrific, horrific. And our deepest apologies to the world, and we'll try to do better to dump Trump out of here. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And as always, so inspiring. And like we send, huge solidarity to you and all those across, the United States who are actively resisting Trump's, racist, reactionary policies domestically, and obviously the carnage that he's wreaking globally. So thank you so much, Anne. And also encouraging those who can, take part in the solidarity actions that Anne was talking about there in relation to Cuba and Venezuela. Right then, I'm now going to move on to our next speaker, which is Abbas Edalat. And he's from the campaign against sanctions and military intervention in Iran. He's a very long-standing friend to CND and the wider anti-war and peace movement. We've been campaigning with Abbas since the Iraq war. So here we are, Abbas, at this terrible time. It's really, really important that we hear from you about your views about what's going on and what we can do to try and end this this horrific conflict.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Comrades and friends, the United States and Israel have launched a full-scale war of aggression against Iran, my home country. This is not a distant conflict. It directly threatens international law, the NPT, and global security. I want to present 5 facts that compel us to act immediately. The first, this war is a direct extension of the genocidal war in Palestine. Let there be no doubt about that. For 29 months, Israel, armed by the United States, has demolished Gaza and terrorized the West Bank. After its systematic aggression also in Lebanon against Syria and Yemen, they have now expanded the genocidal war to Iran. The attacks were launched under the cover of negotiations for the second time in less than 9 months. Hours before the bombs fell, the Omani foreign minister, who mediated the negotiations between Iran and the US in Geneva, appeared on CBS's Face the Nation. He announced that Iran had given unprecedented concessions on its nuclear program. In fact, Iran had agreed never to stockpile enriched uranium and many other concessions. And Iran agreed to put every proposal that the US had made on the table for negotiations. He said, so this is the Omani foreign minister, he said that peace is within reach. The next round of talks involving technical teams from both sides was scheduled for the following week in Vienna. Shortly afterwards, Israel and the US, these two rogue and deranged nuclear-armed states, bombed Iran, a non-nuclear armed country. To ensure the world understood this was an extension of the genocidal war against Palestine, they deliberately slaughtered over 165 people in an elementary girls' school in the city of Mina, in one of their first strikes against the country. 110 were children aged between 7 and 12, killed in their classrooms. They also assassinated in their first strike Iran's head of state and his family, as well as dozens of other Iranian leaders. This aggression is not about Iran's non-existing nuclear weapons program, about human rights, about threats by Iran, or all other pretexts the US leaders propagate and their servile mainstream media, which have been demonizing Iran and Muslims for decades, simply repeat. Iran's real crime is just one thing. Iran's crime is supporting the Palestinian cause for their national rights. Iran is the only nation state that has meaningfully tried to fulfill its obligations under the Geneva Convention for genocide. This is very important to understand. Iran is the only UN nation state which has meaningfully tried to fulfill its obligations under the Genocide Convention. For that, Iran is being bombed for no other reason. Second fact, Iran is defending itself and has survived far worse scenarios. The US and Israel aim for regime change and the balkanization of Iran. Against this, Iran is exercising its legal right to self-defense under international law and under the NPT. Iran has prepared for this aggression since the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. Drawing on its Shia faith, which honors the model of sacrifice embodied by the Prophet's grandson, Iran is able to endure far longer than its aggressors. Its strategy is very simple: survive the initial onslaught and wait for the aggressors to exhaust themselves. This is a republic that survived two huge assassination campaigns by the MKO cult in its early years. It survived 8 years of Saddam Hussein's war of aggression, a war in which the West provided Saddam with chemical weapons, which he used against Iranian civilians and soldiers. Hundreds of thousands died. Tens of thousands were maimed for life because of chemical injury. Iran did not retaliate in kind to develop its own weapons of mass destruction or chemical weapons. But Iran managed to repel that aggression. It will do so again. The third fact, the apocalyptic ideology of Israel and the United States makes this a nuclear danger. This war is driven by fanatics. In occupied Palestine, Zionist extremists speak openly of a greater Israel project, a project supported by the US ambassador to Israel. In the United States, Christian Zionists believe war in the Middle East against Iran is necessary for the return of Jesus Christ. US soldiers have been told they are fighting for the second coming. This is policy, not metaphor. This is very, very important. I think they are having this narrative of the end of times, and they are mobilizing religious extremism to support their war drive. This creates an extremely dangerous situation. When Israel and the US run out of conventional options, they may well contemplate the Samson option. In fact, Israeli leaders, many of them in the past decades, have threatened that if they are cornered, they may use the Samson option. In fact, the use of nuclear weapons. If nuclear weapons are used in the Middle East, the result will be world war and nuclear catastrophe globally. The fourth fact, the NPT is already shattered because of Western nuclear hypocrisy, and this war may well finish it. In June of last year, during the 12-day war against Iran, two nuclear-armed states, Israel and the United States, bombed Iran's civilian nuclear facilities. These sites were under full IAEA inspection. There was no violation. There was no proliferation. Yet they bombed. The message to every country watching is very simple. If you want to survive, get nuclear weapons. If you already have them, strengthen your arsenal. After those attacks, the majority opinion among Iranian people shifted. A majority now believed the state needed nuclear weapons for survival. A significant section of the ruling elite approached the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and urged him to change his fatwa against nuclear weapons. He refused. Israel and the US have now killed him. The new leader will face immense pressure to invoke Article 10 of the NPT, legally withdraw from the treaty, and build a bomb to ensure the state's survival. If Iran goes nuclear, the non-proliferation treaty is dead. So now come to my fifth main fact. Our British government is complicit in this crime. Instead of condemning this unprovoked aggression, the British government has given the United States full access to its military bases in Cyprus and Diego Garcia. British territory is being used to launch and sustain a war of aggression. France, Italy, Greece, and Germany have also lined up behind the United States, invoking the language of collective defense. So now we have got 4 nuclear-armed states joining this vicious aggression against Iran. But there is no attack to defend against. Iran was negotiating. Iran had given concessions. This is an offensive war, a war of choice, a war of aggression. Under the Nuremberg principles, as the judge at the court famously said, unprovoked aggression is the supreme crime, as it contains all other crimes, and complicity in a war of aggression is itself a crime. The UK government is committing this crime. We must demand that the Labour government condemn this US-Israeli aggression. We must demand that it refuses US access to the military bases. Stop the bombing, hands off Iran, no military bases for the US, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Abbas. I've just stepped in because Sophie's computer's just crashed. So I'm really sorry about that, but she'll be back with us any minute. The question of Iran's nuclear program is really central to the arguments that are happening here and the hypocrisy around it in particular. So thank you for your comments, Abbas. And, you know, countering that narrative is definitely something that we need to do in the hypocrisy in particular around it. So I'll go on to our next speaker now. If we can just get this up. Thank you. So our next speaker is Dania Akkad. Seen Dania three times this week, which has been wonderful. But Dania is an investigative journalist with Declassified and previously worked for Middle Eastern Eye. So I'll let you take the room now, Dania. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I hope you can hear me. Yeah? Okay, great. Thanks so much to CND for organizing this discussion tonight and bringing us together. I'm the deputy editor at Declassified UK, and just in case you're not familiar with us, we're an independent investigative journalism organization uncovering the UK's role in the world. And our goal is to better inform the public so that you can hold the government accountable and push for more ethical foreign and domestic British policies. So it's public service journalism, hopefully at its best. And tonight, I want to tell you a little bit about the use of UK military bases by the US, which is something we've been looking into quite a bit since the start of this year. And you may hear from my accent that although I live and work here in the UK, I'm not actually a full-blown British citizen. Well, I am a British citizen. I've passed your very stringent citizenship test, but I'm actually American. And just by chance, I've been aware for most of my life that the American military has had a presence here in the UK, and that's because my grandfather was a colonel in the US Air Force during World War II and was stationed in this country for quite a while. But it wasn't really until this January, when a crew of us from Declassified headed up to RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk, that I kind of fully realized just how much of an active presence the American military still has in this country today. And just to give you a sense of it, there are currently 24 sites across the United Kingdom with American military intelligence. Now back in January, line plane spotters that aircraft transiting through RAF bases en route to the Middle East. And when we got there, that's exactly what we saw and what we heard from the regular plane spotters who were hanging out in the viewing area. They were really excited because they had been able to take so many photos of advanced American aircraft passing through. And while we were there, we watched as a bunch of F-35 fighter jets did practice runs over us. And I've actually spent a lot of time in the last 2 years thinking about and reporting on F-35s in the context of the war in Gaza and the key role that they played for the Israeli assault on Palestinians there. But I'd actually never seen one in person. And it was something to see it in person. They are so loud and they can shake your bones when they fly over you. And I really encourage anyone who cares about all of this to kind of just go to RAF Lakenheath and stand there at the viewing post and feel it for yourself, because it's really something to see them up close. And it was something to realize that these jets and many others were on their way to the Middle East. So we were there in mid-January, and that was right after Trump had said the US was locked and loaded and ready to help protesters in Iran. So we knew something might be coming. And fast forward to now, the Lakenheath Alliance for Peace has just reported today that 100 fighter jets have left Lakenheath since January on their way to the Middle East, along with a large number of C-17 transport planes, which are like a type of aircraft that can carry troops and cargo and are typically deployed before an operation or conflict. We also know that many American airplanes have been passing through RAF Mildenhall and Prestwick Airport in Scotland during these past 2 months, and they're continuing to pass through now. So this buildup has been going on for a good 2 months now. And a couple of questions that we've been considering at Declassified is whether the US government asked permission to transit these planes through the UK bases, whether the US was required to ask permission, and whether allowing the planes to pass through makes the UK complicit in the US-Israeli attack on Iran. So those are a couple of questions, and here are some more. Before the US and Israel attacked Iran, it was reported that Keir Starmer had refused to allow the Americans to use RAF Fairford and the British base at Diego Garcia to bomb Iran directly. And it was reported that the request was apparently refused over concerns that those strikes would violate international law. And I just want to mention here that, so that report where that came out was in the Times. And we asked the MOD twice if they would confirm this, if the US had asked permission to use British bases to attack Iran, and what the UK's government's response had been. And we could never get a confirmation on this. So the British public, in my mind, was informed about this initial refusal and British policy through a report in the Times based on unnamed sources, which is a whole nother issue we can talk about another time, but I thought it was just really important to raise that. after the attacks on Iran last weekend and after Iranian retaliatory attacks across the region, Starmer announced on Sunday that the UK has now decided that the US can use British bases to launch what he has said were defensive operations against Iran. So I think I think now our questions that we're asking at Declassified are, what is the legality of what the UK is doing now? While Starmer says that the UK is defending its allies in the Gulf, isn't the UK also facilitating US strikes that are part of an unlawful campaign? How can the UK government ensure that US strikes launched from British bases are defensive? And these are just questions that we're now obviously exploring. There are many others, but I'll stop here, and I'm very much looking forward to your questions. And thank you for having us.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dania. Really important questions and just such critical work that Declassified is doing. And I think, given the sort of the worsening in relation to sort of any kind of accountability of this government, certainly on military issues and definitely on nuclear issues, we need the sort of the work of Declassified now more than ever. Okay, so we're now moving on to our final speaker. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Carol Turner, who's the Vice Chair of CND. She's an author as well. She's very, very knowledgeable on a wide range of issues, including the situation in Iran and also, the sort of history of Iran's attempts to engage in, diplomacy and negotiations around its nuclear program. So really great to have you with us, Carol. Over to you.
Thanks, Sophie, and thank you everyone for joining this really important call and this really important cause. I've been campaigning and following what's happening in the Middle East for almost 40 years now. And it's the bombing of Iran is a particularly depressing and anxious activity. So just to repeat one or two things that Sophie said when people were still joining the call. At the end of day 5 yesterday, over 100 Iranians have been reported killed. It included over 160 pupils and staff in a southern Iranian school. And of course, as people know, it included the supreme leader and other senior political and religious figures. President Trump, Secretary of State Rubio, and War Secretary Hegseth have all warned that this war will go on with growing intensity for weeks at least. They all repeat that Iran will not be allowed to have nuclear weapons, and Prime Minister Netanyahu does the same. In the 6 days of the war, it's already spread beyond Iran. The US has intensified its bombing of Tehran and elsewhere. Israel is bombarding the south of Lebanon as we speak. Hezbollah engaged with Israel only days after the war began, and Iran, as everyone I'm sure is aware, has retaliated with counterstrikes on Israel and against military, diplomatic, and energy facilities across the Gulf states. By Monday, supply disruptions as a result of precautionary shutdowns of oil and gas facilities were being reported. Traffic across the Straits of Hormuz is seriously interrupted, and oil prices are rising. This war, at least in its economic form, has the real potential to spread beyond the Middle East and is already doing so. Yet again, Trump and Netanyahu are using the pretext of nuclear weapons as justification for launching a war on Iran, as they did during the 12-day war in June last year, and as Abbas explained they've done in the past. CND, as I'm sure everyone realises, is implacably opposed to the possession of nuclear weapons by any country, including our own. We campaign for the abolition of the Trident nuclear weapon system. And Britain's nuclear capability has been expanding in the recent past with the sighting of US nuclear gravity bombs at Lakenheath and the purchase of nuclear-capable US jets. They'll be stationed at Marham and they will take part in NATO's nuclear missions. This makes us a target and it endangers everyone in Britain. That's why we want to stop British bases being used by the US in this war against Iran. But let's take a step back for a moment and consider the case of Iran. President Obama negotiated one of the most successful contemporary nuclear arms reduction deals of recent times, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. In return for lifting some sanctions, Iran agreed to limit the development of its civil nuclear program and open its nuclear facilities up to IAEA inspections. Iran, unlike Israel, is a long-time member of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, as Abbas pointed out. The International Atomic Energy confirmed the JCPOA was working. US and military intelligence services confirmed it was working. During his first term of office, President Trump holds the US out of the agreement. Effectively, he brought it to an end. Only 2 weeks ago, as Abbas has outlined, US-Iran talks were said to be making progress. Trump said it, the Iranians said it, Oman's foreign minister, who was facilitating the negotiations, said it, and they were due to reopen again around about now. Furthermore, shortly after the latest negotiations adjourned, Iran announced it would permit IAEA inspections, which had ended as a result of the 12-day war. So ask yourself this. If Trump is so keen on ending Iran's nuclear program, why did he pull out of the JCPOA? And why has he abandoned talks that he said only a few days before bombing began were progressing? Why did he do that to launch a military blitzkrieg on Iran? And what about Israel? Israel is the only state in the Middle East that possesses nuclear weapons. It's refused to acknowledge it has them. It's done that since the 1960s. It refuses to sign up to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it doesn't permit IAEA inspections. In both cases, the claim that the war is to stop Iran getting nuclear weapons is no more and no less than a barefaced nuclear hypocrisy. If I had time, I would be very happy to go into much more detail about this, and if people have questions, I'll be pleased to do so. Let me turn now to Britain and Keir Starmer's role in the war. By the end of the second day of the blitz bombing of the Iranian cities on Sunday evening, under pressure from Trump, Starmer announced that British bases could be used for, quote, defensive attacks, unquote, on Iran. That means, as Dania suggested, Lakenheath, Mildenhall, Artikriti in Cyprus and other UK facilities are being and will be used. This is why Iran targeted Al-Kriti, thankfully without loss of life and only minimal damage according to Cypriot authorities. Starmer's statement is yet another piece of constructive ambiguity that the UK Prime Minister has developed a reputation for in his short time in office. My final point is this. I personally don't believe Trump and Netanyahu when they say the war is about Iran's potential to develop nuclear weapons, and neither should you. It may be part of Trump's unclear objectives, but you don't need a war to achieve a nuclear agreement. I believe it's an attempt to change the regime from the air. Indeed, very serious commentators in the United States, close to the White House, have said so and continue to say so. And we should all be listening to the growing number of security and military commentators that tell us it can't be done. You cannot change a regime without boots on the ground, which Trump is more than reluctant to do. It's about attempting to destroy Trump's biggest adversary in the region, that's Iran, and establish Israel, which Trump calls a core ally of the United States. Establish Israel as the sole hegemon in the Middle East. In the process of this reckless campaign, there's a serious and growing danger that the war will spark conflict across the broader Middle East and even beyond. The Middle East is one of the most unstable regions in the world, and who knows where this war might end. So, in conclusion, CND is calling for an end to the war on Iran, a return to negotiations, and we join with the British Trade Union Congress in calling, I'm quoting, for comprehensive and universal ratification of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and for strengthening international efforts at reducing nuclear armaments and safeguarding collective security. CND is also demanding British bases are not used for attacks on Iran. Join us on the streets, join us online, add your voices to the majority of public opinion in Britain who oppose Trump's war, and help us to put an end to the war on Iran. Thanks for listening.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Carol. So you've now heard from all of our speakers. Unfortunately, I think have we lost Abbas? We have. Oh dear, that's a shame. Okay, so we've got a slightly reduced panel now in terms of our questions. So be gentle. So I'm going to take some of the questions that we've already had in, and answer what you feel comfortable with. Don't feel like you have to, you don't feel like you have to answer ones that you don't feel comfortable with. And people need to put their questions into the Q&A. Unfortunately, that's how you get your questions in. Let's take a few questions to begin with. So we've had a really good one from David saying, can the US invoke NATO Article 5, which is, an attack on one NATO member state is an attack on all NATO member states, and therefore, the entire NATO alliance should, come in behind that country. So he's sort of saying, can the US invoke Article 5 in relation to what's going on in terms of the attacks on Iran, and would that kind of drag us even further into this war? I certainly know that there were Iranian drones that were sort of targeting Turkey, and Turkey announced that it was NATO military installations that downed that drone. So, that's certainly potential there. Then we've had another question from James, which is, how can we prevent the US and UK governments using the Iran war to suppress protest? And he's just sort of citing, ongoing sort of police brutality in the States. What else have we got here? Yeah, we've got another question here in relation to sort of Starmer giving permission to Trump to use British bases. So this is a question from Anne saying, do we think that like if Starmer had refused to so basically hadn't caved in to Trump's pressure and had sort of continued to refuse the use of British bases, do you think that that would have made would that have made any difference to the kind of the military conflict that we're seeing unfolding here? So I think if we just start, if that's all right, let's start with those questions and then I'll come back for another round and see how we're doing, if that's okay. All right. So is it all right if I take you, Carol, first? Is that all right in terms of what you'd like to answer?
Sure, thanks, Sophie. Article 5. I think that America in practice can and possibly will invoke in Article 5. It's been said by various North American pundits and commentators and so on, hasn't it? Whether it has the moral or de jure ability to do so is questionable. The Iran war is illegal in the same way that the Israel war on Gaza is illegal. America has attacked civilian infrastructure. It's killed civilians, and it's going to be killing more of them in the days to come. There's no doubt about that. It has the military supremacy, the military firepower to do so. The Article 5, if people are not sure, is to call NATO allies to support each other in time of war. And it's already been said by by various European sources. I think it's also been said by the NATO General Secretary as well, if I'm not convinced, that it's been raised as a possibility. So I really think it's a very good question from David, was it? Very good question, and we ought to keep our eye on that. We ought to include it in some of the demands and comments that are being made publicly. On question 2, Jane, the right to protest. I think this is quite a difficult one. If you look at American opinion polls, I saw one, I think it was yesterday, that said that only 1 in 4 Americans supported what Trump was doing in Iran. I think the feeling of the American public that I'm getting from looking at American news sources and watching some of the British TV, the BBC acts as a sort of outpost of American media most of the time, does it not nowadays? The feeling I'm getting is it's very difficult for Trump. The Democrat, supported by a few Republicans, attempted yesterday to invoke the War Powers Act, which failed, but there was a substantial minority in favour of it. And there's also a section of his base and a section of the Republican politicals who are actually not in favour of getting involved in a war that they don't see anything to do with America. So I think that's quite a difficult one. And the public opinion won't stop Trump from what he's doing, but it is at some point going to call a halt. The effect of Vietnam is still conscious in most American minds. Quick point on Anne's question, the final one. If Starmer refused, would it made any difference? Who knows? All I think is that he was very unlikely to refuse. It would have made a moral difference. It would have supported the opposition. But would it have stopped America? I guess not. Trump said that Starmer was no Churchill. I would put it a different way. I would say Starmer is no Harold Wilson. And I don't know if people remember, but during the course of the Vietnam War, when Harold Wilson was the then Labour Prime Minister, he absolutely refused behind the scenes to send troops or to provide financial support for what America was doing. At the same time, he offered verbal support in public statements. And my feeling is that Trump is trying to do something like that. Trump is no Harold Wilson, thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Carol. Okay, so over to you, Dania, in terms of what you'd like to come back on.
Yeah, I think, Carol, I appreciated your answers on the first two questions, and I don't think I have a lot to add, and also in the interest of getting to other questions. But I did want to say something in response to Anne's question. I read that question as sort of asking whether I see it in two phases. If Starmer had not given permission to the Americans to allow their planes to transit through for 2 months, would that have made a material difference to the attack on Iran? And then second phase, how about, Fairford and Diego Garcia now being allowed to be used in Akrotiri and all of the British bases? And on both points, I think if Starmer had refused, there would be a material difference. Look at how many planes went through these bases in January and February. They're clearly very important to the Americans to get their so-called armada over. So materially very important. And then with Diego Garcia and Fairford, they have these really specific things about them that make them very important. Fairford has a 10,000 foot runway, and it's the U.S. Air Force's only European airfield for heavy bombers. So it's really important. And Diego Garcia has a runway long enough for B-2 stealth bombers. So strategically, they're very important. And I think they would make a difference if they weren't on the table for the U.S. to use. And I also think, Anne, your question raises questions that we have ourselves, which is, what permissions are required for what level of operations. If the U.S. attacks a foreign country from Britain, from an airbase, they do need to ask permission. But what if they're just transiting through airplanes that are definitely going to be used in an operation? I just think there's a lot of questions about when the UK must permit things and has to be asked, and when things just happen because of agreements that we don't know about as a public. So I really appreciate that question.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've got a few more. I'm going to slightly kind of sort of pull some together that have a sort of a similar theme. So we've had a question which is like, how can people force the British government to basically abandon support for this war? Like, what are the sort of the tactics that we could be using? What do you think about, disruption? We've also had a point about, like, what it's great that the trade unions have made this really, really powerful statement, but what more do we think that trade unions could be doing? So that's that question. We've also had one in relation to, the role of the media in terms of sort of like basically sort of shaping a narrative that sort of justifies these illegal wars. We had it in relation to Iraq, and we're sort of having it now. So just in terms of how we can challenge that, and whether we think that it's having the same kind of power that it had previously in the Iraq war, now that we have sort of social media. So that would be a great question to sort of feed in on. And then we've got I've got a very good question here from Alex Gordon. Hello, lovely Alex Gordon, and Vice President of CND. So he's saying, in the era of drone warfare and hypersonic missile technology, against which there is no defense, the presence of British military bases in Cyprus makes everyone less safe, especially the people of Cyprus. Basically, do you think that Britain, the peace movement in Britain, could be doing more in terms of, sort of making common cause with the Cypriot anti-military bases campaign? Okay. So that's a long question, but you've got a bit of time there to kind of come back on that. So yeah, the kind of how we can build opposition to the war here, the government support for the war here. So in terms of how we could put pressure on the British government, the role of the media. In terms of if that's shifting now, and then also kind of, I suppose, international solidarity with other campaigns of campaigning for the shutting down kind of British bases. So I'll go to you again, Carol, if that's okay, to come back on any of those or all of those, however you feel.
Okay, thanks. How can we put pressure on the British government by the same way we always do, take to the streets? I've been campaigning on international solidarity and anti-war issues for 40 years. I can't begin to count the number of times people have said, oh, we failed, we didn't stop the war on this, that, or the other country. We, as a movement on the streets, don't have the power to say, no, there won't be a war. But what we do have the power to do is to put serious pressure on the government. And think of that in respect of the changing political environment in Britain. It's no longer a case of two established conventional parties vying for parliament. There are all sorts of new movements and new parties arising. The rise of the Green Party is the obvious example. And what we do in terms of marching and local activities and events, I think, is really important. That also relates in part to the second question, which is the impact of social media and a wider variety of social media. I'm going to defer to Dania on both of those other questions, but my view is it's no longer the government no longer has the ability to get the mainstream media, such as BBC, to pump out its propaganda, to control the information we get. You can see that in the case of the BBC, which is very loyal to Britain in terms of foreign wars, but it's not the only source. And people now have a much greater ability, don't they? I'll leave the rest of that to Dania.
Brilliant. Thanks, Carol. Okay, over to you, Dania.
Yeah, Carol, I think your point about social media making it impossible for legacy media to kind of dominate the narrative is spot on. And that's something that didn't really exist during the Iraq War. I remember, during that war, there would be bits and pieces of leaks here and there breaking, or, you had Reuters or I can't remember the other name of the news agency, but people would get leaks and then you'd find out that there was all this bad stuff happening. But it took weeks and weeks and weeks. And now we've got so much information coming at us all the time. I think it's very hard for anyone to hide. And also, I would say with these open source, the plane spotting, everyone's watching this in real time. So it's really hard to kind of hide things at this point. But I also say there's like a flip side to that, where we're all getting bombarded with so much information that I think it can be hard to kind of stay focused and sort of know where to put your energies or to kind of just sort of understand exactly what's going on, follow things from A to Z. It's just can be very confusing. I had a friend in New York City we were talking about 10 days ago. This is a friend who I protested I protested the war in Iraq with. And so I said, my God, Rebecca, I feel like we're about to have this war in Iran, but nobody's it doesn't feel like the world is talking about it. It's one amongst a million things happening right now, this whole flood the zone policy that the Trump administration has. So I worry that while we now have kind of this power to see all these things and to follow all these things, it's hard to keep up with all of it. But I guess I'd also just say I think independent media, and I'm a little bit biased here, but we've been asking a lot of questions before this became so topical about the use of UK bases by the Americans, and I think we felt a little bit crazy. We were out, there weren't a lot of people in legacy media asking these questions, but now they're quite relevant. So I would just say independent media like Declassified, like Middle East Eye, we have kind of a role to play now and we didn't really exist during the Iraq War. So it's we can help with sort of filtering through all of the information coming at you. And I can't remember what the other question was. I'm sorry to say.
No, that's fine. Can I remember what it was? I
And
think it was.
hypersonics, drones
Oh,
and
yes,
hypersonics.
yes. It was Alex's. Shall I read it out again? Is that helpful? Well, it was actually more in relation to solidarity with other with sort of other sort of campaigns against military bases. So it was drone warfare, hypersonic missiles, for which there's no defense. The presence of military bases in Cyprus makes everyone, less safe. So should we have more, should we kind of be working more in solidarity with campaigns like the anti-military bases campaign in Cyprus?
Um, I definitely think they're worth chatting to, and actually, this is quite relevant. We just have a film out today. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to plug Declassified. It just happens to be relevant. We have a story that
Plug away, plug away.
we had a story that just went out a couple of hours ago, and a film that goes along with it, following a woman who's running to be an MP in Cyprus, and it's her constituency is right on RAF Akrotiri, and it kind of runs you through all of the issues that they deal with living near this base and their feelings about it. So if you're interested in understanding kind of that side of things and getting in touch with anybody there, watch the film, read the story, and these people are findable online. So absolutely a path in. It's the lead story on Declassified right now.
Can
Brilliant.
I just chip in, Sophie, with part of the first question that I didn't comment on, and Dania didn't come back on either, and that is the trade unions. I think the statement from the TUC General Council is probably much weaker than any one of us would like to see them making. But I do think it's really important that they've made it. And perhaps even more important, there are already statements going round signed by general secretaries on behalf of individual unions representing much stronger anti-war views. One of the partners that we CND regularly work with on these sorts of issues is Stop the War. And the two of us are together, aren't we, Sophie, and getting some very practical stuff, resolutions to trade unions, getting round trade union branches, getting them to invite speakers and so on. So if there's anyone on this call with the ability to do that, contact Sophie, contact the C&D office.
Brilliant. I mean, I think the question in relation to, what more can we be doing, and the sort of the role of disruption. I mean, C&D has got like a very rich history of like sort of disrupting military bases. We think about the Greenham Common with all the 60,000 women on the nuclear silos, and that's still absolutely critical in terms of stopping sort of activity on the bases, drawing attention to the bases. And I would give a plug for there's going to be a blockade of RAF Lakenheath, which Dania was talking about, where you've had all these F-35 fighter jets, that have been sent off to the Middle East, which are now, as I say, totally kind of engaging in sort of military action in support of Israel and the US. So there's going to be a blockade at that military base on Saturday, the 4th of April. C&D's putting on coaches from around the country. So so check out that, and you can get there, and that would be really good. You know, if you can take part in, there was a really powerful blockade last year where 200 people took part in a sort of a sit down protest, and sort of basically sort of brought the base to a standstill for over 3 hours. So so I think, you know, that kind of action is really, really critical. And certainly during the Iraq war, there was a lot of, and this is something else that we should be doing actually in relation to what's going on with Iran, this whole issue around the nuclear hypocrisy. You know, where are the nuclear weapons? So the whole idea of a citizens' weapons inspection came from the Iraq war. So people would be going to nuclear bases in Britain and in the States to say, oh, let's just, can we do a weapons inspection in this base? I think we've got nuclear weapons here. So we should definitely be doing that here now in Britain and in the States as well, where that we clearly, you know, as Carol said, we've clearly got nuclear weapons and we're expanding them and upgrading them. So definitely that. Okay, so I'm just going to have our final round of questions. I want to thank our remaining speakers for really, really excellent kind of responses to these questions. So we've got one from Tom Cuthbert, really, really excellent question, which is, you know, it's this issue around the kind of the erosion of support for the Trump leadership, given the, you know, not only the kind of the chaos and the greater dangers that are, you know, presented by the Trump administration, but also the economic impact, you know, the huge kind of economic crisis we're seeing and the economic coercion. So, you know, can you talk a bit about, like, you know, if you think that's going to increase, or like what's kind of going on in terms of the sort of the kind of the sort of cracks that are definitely sort of showing between US allies now. So that's that question. And then we had a really great question in from now what I've just trying to find the name, because it's a really good question now. Where has it gone? I can't find his name now. Anyway, saying why do we even have UK bases in the Middle East? What an excellent question that is. Yeah. So those are your kind of sort of final questions, really. And then if you've got kind of any, you know, any sort of final comments that you would like, you know, both like to make, please do. Thanks. So I'm going to go to you again, Carol, if that's okay.
Okay, Tom, a perspicacious question as always. It's true that current circumstances are putting a stress on the relationship between Europe and the United States, the sort of military and security relationship, and others, of course. However, I think this is a double-edged weapon for us in the peace and anti-war movement, and it's a contradictory issue in terms of European and British public opinion. Trump, whatever else he's doing, is not pulling NATO out of Europe. On the contrary, NATO facilities are increasing in Europe. A year ago, an anti-missiles facility opened in Poland, all sorts of examples of it. The cracks in the relationship between the United States and Europe don't actually mean that Europe is becoming more anti-war. They mean that Europe is rearming and putting more and more money into military spending, and I don't need to tell anyone in this audience what that means. And we're not in favour of that, and we shouldn't be in favour of it. The issue for Trump, in my opinion, is more the impact on his base is more important. Trump has a base amongst the MAGA movement because he presents himself as an ordinary person speaking for ordinary Americans. This is rubbish. he puts his comments and his statements in ordinary language that everyday Americans use and understand, but his real interests represent big capital and those sections of capital that benefit from war, the military industry, are part of that. Trump's popularity, I'm not sure if people are how aware of this people are, but Trump's popularity is declining, and he's worried about that. A section of the Republican Party with a different sort of ideological slant are not happy about him engaging in foreign wars. And his MAGA base, no longer a mega base, his MAGA base is actually concerned about other issues. We've not been talking about them on this call, although I think Anne mentioned it in her original speech, which is what the ICE authorities are doing in America. This does not build support for a president. And therefore, I think we're in a very chaotic situation, and it's very difficult to say how things are going to go. But we should keep on campaigning. I'm going to leave the second question to Dania. I don't want to hog the responses, but I do want to say a quick word, if I may, about something I missed in that second sentence about what was happening to the right to protest. Look at Sophie mentioned the blockade that CND and Lakenheath Alliance for Peace did last year. The people who sat down and blocked the base, or some of them, decided they weren't going to be moved on, and they were arrested. They were recently tried. They were tried by jury, and they were either found not guilty or the charges were not proven. Add that to the Palestine action issues, add that to what's on the go with the court cases against Ben Jamal from PSC, against Chris Nynam from Stop the War, that are underway at the moment. And also, if you don't know, there is another court case due to come up soon against Sophie herself, against the General Secretary of CND, for participating in the same activity that Ben and Chris are being attacked for, and Sophie and Alex, who is the chair of Stop the War. I don't think it's going that way. I don't think it's going the way of the government on this. I think for the reasons that Dania has also pointed to when she spoke about social media and the sort of changes in the media. That's it. Thanks, Sophie.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Carol. Over to you, Dania.
Okay, I think the question that I'm answering, well, the question I'm happy to answer was I like that question about why does the UK even have military bases in the Middle East? And this is a colonial legacy, right? Comes out of the UK's colonial history in the Middle East, and a lot of the places, all of the places where bases are, I would think. Actually, I have to fact check.
Think we might have lost Dania. I think she's just, is that not just me? She's frozen. Is that your experience, Carol?
Yeah, she's frozen.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a great shame. Maybe she'll come back. But maybe she won't.
Oh, she's back.
She's been taken out.
Okay, I don't think she's gonna, but okay, well look, I'm gonna finish the webinar now. I'd like to sort of thank, oh, you're back. Hello.
Sorry, I don't know what happened.
That's fine. That's absolutely fine. Yeah. No, you just froze and then yeah, but you're back. That's the main thing. So do please continue.
Oh, so yeah, so I was just saying that the UK has this presence in the Gulf and in other parts of the region because of the colonial history, and I would say the UK has kept them because it gives the UK political leverage across the region and internationally. Obviously, these bases are protecting trade and energy supplies. It's supporting allies in the Gulf that buy weapons from the UK and other products. From the UK government perspective, they would say counterterrorism is an issue. And so having a presence in these countries is really important. I'm not saying that I agree with that, but I think these are the reasons why those bases are still there now.
Thank you. And why they're now a target, obviously. Because the role the British government continues to play this sort of colonialist role, does it not? Or definitely prop up the US. Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us at this really, really critical time. Thank you to our speakers. And I would just sort of reiterate how critical it is that we turn around this absolutely like devastating illegal war on Iran. Certainly, we're really encouraging people to. There are two demonstrations you can go to if you live in Britain. So there's a demonstration in central London, which is going from sort of Millbank just down from Parliament, assembling at midday, and then that's going to be marching down to the US Embassy. We've got some fantastic speakers at that, so please join that. Or if you're kind of in a different part of the country, we've got a demonstration at RAF Fairford, which Dania was talking about in terms of like this having this runway that means the B-52 bombers can, are sort of launched from there. So that's happening. So if you go onto CND's website, I think Rachel's already put the details into the chat. Yes, she had. That's fantastic. So you've got the details there of, you can go onto our website to get them there. But please do mobilize for these demonstrations because this is an absolutely devastating conflict, a really, really devastating war that threatens, the entire region. People talk about like, the horrors of the Iraq war. Well, Iran is double the size of Iraq. And, we're already seeing that this is, spreading, way beyond Iran. So it's absolutely critical that we sort of stand up against this and challenge this horrific kind of illegal, brutal, reckless nuclear arms, actions of the US and Israel, because we're all fighting for the same cause, aren't we? We all desperately need a new world order that is based on peace, diplomacy, global cooperation, where we're actually sort of, trying to sort of struggle for a world where we can end the real security issues that we face, like climate breakdown, global extreme poverty. These are the things that we really need to be focusing on. And so I think coming back to Anne Wright's, wonderful presentation, there are countries that are really leading the way on the kind of values that we all support, like Cuba that's exporting doctors, not war. Countries that are really focusing on trying to sort of raise, people out of poverty, to improve people's sort of literacy levels, to give them really good access to health and education. So, there are lots of countries out there that are beacons of hope for the kind of world that we want. And so we shouldn't feel that we're, isolated. We shouldn't feel that we're on our own. We're not at all. All the more reason why we need kind of global solidarity. So please, as I say, join us Saturday for all those demonstrations and keep involved. This is just the beginning in terms of the sort of the response and resistance to this war drive. Thanks very much.